Okay, with everything done so far, let's get started a little bit on a user interface. Now we're going to be making a user interface that's very simple because I tend to focus on things that are more functional, and I consider it more like polished to make something look pretty. So we will be making an interface that doesn't look super pretty, but it's going to be functional, and then if you want to, you can polish it further if you want to continue on this. Anyway, so we're going to be making some widgets now. And we're going to be making 3 widgets. We're going to be making first user interface, widget blueprint, call it W_HUD for HUD. Then we're going to make another user interface widget, which we call W_ability container. Then we're going to make another user interface, which we call W_ability, like so. Okay, now if we open up the HUD, this is what the HUD looks like. Now we don't want a whole lot of things here. We just basically want to have a, if we go to user created, we can go and get our ability container. We can drag it in here somewhere. We can make sure that it has an anchor. So let's say we want to have it anchored to the bottom right. So that means that it will get its X and Y position in relation to that corner. When it comes to the actual measurements, I don't know, we can try something like -300, -200 maybe. So it'll be sort of like in the down right, like a controller. And I think that's probably fine for our purposes. You want to make sure to click the size to content, which will make it really small here in the beginning, but that will make sure that whatever you put in here will have, it will make sure that it fits in this container basically. We want to make very little logic in here. We want to have only one function or one event. So we'll create a custom event. And this one we will call set abilities. Now this will be something we just use as an initialization basic for our abilities when we have them later on. And what we will do is we will take in a variable here of the type integer. And then we will change the type here to map dictionary, which means you'll get another drop down here for the type. And the other type that we want this ability to be, or ability, this map to be, is the BP abilities. So to explain this briefly, if you do not know, we'll also call it UI abilities. In map is sort of like a two-part array where the first part functions sort of as a key and the second as sort of the result or the content of that key. So here we could have, for example, an array which has values 0, 1 and 2, and then for each of those you would have a corresponding ability here. And that is actually exactly what we're going to be doing. But we don't have what we're going to be using this for ready yet, because that's going to come in the other widget. So let's go start using that widget, which is the ability container. So now that we have opened that one up, let's go through what this one will be having. Now, this one will be a pretty simple container when it comes to the visuals. We'll be deleting the canvas and we'll be changing from fill screen to desired on screen. We will be adding something called an overlay, which allows us to stack multiple widget objects on top of this one if we wanted to, although we're not going to in this specific case. We're going to be using a uniform grid panel. We're going to be handing that one in over there. And we mark the uniform grid panel and we call it uniform grid panel, and we check in variable, We compile and save, which means that we now have uniform grid panel over here as a variable. Now, there are a few things we want to do here. We want to do, first of all, what we talked about earlier about we wanting to set our abilities. We want to handle that somehow. So we want to make a custom event here. We can call it init abilities because that's what we're going to be doing. And we want to make sure that this is the same type as the one we created before. So we make it first a integer and we make it a map dictionary. Then we change it to BP ability. So, and then we call it UI abilities, like so. I'm a little bit, BPI ability is wrong. I want to have this one. I'm not sure if I made the same error on the other widget. I'm going to double check. No, it looks right. You can see from the colors that they're supposed to be blue as in actor references. I accidentally got an interface in here, which made it look all wrong. Anyway, so this is where we're going to be starting. So when it comes to working with dictionaries, it's a little bit different. First off, here we want to have keys, and that is because I want to get an array of all the key values in this case. And that is so I can then use that to loop on. So that's why we're doing this. After we have done that, we can get an array element over here, and we can use, let's see, if we drag this one out and type find, you can see that it requires a integer in here. And the integer that it's going to get is the array element. It's not the array index, even though they could be the same technically, but they're not going to be in some point. So you need to make sure that you're getting the right value here. So we're saying we want to have whatever key from here in this array so we can actually get the ability out from it. Then we just make a validation for this. And we check if we have actually found a value, or found a value over here. And then we want to create a widget. So we're going to be creating a widget of type wAbility. Now, wAbility doesn't know anything about abilities yet, so we need to make sure that it is ready for that. So we're going to be going over to our ability over here. We're going to be going over here, and we're going to make two variables. We're going to make one called ability, which will be of type BP ability reference. Then we're going to be making another variable, and we're going to be calling this one image, and we can make it of texture to the object reference, like so. Now what we need to do with these are we need to click them as instance editable and expose and spawn. Make sure to do it on both of these variables we created, and then we compile and save. This means that they are available in this widget when it is running the constructed part. Because when you create a widget now, if we refresh this node over here, you can see that the two new, the expose and spawn panes have been exposed here. So we can get our ability over here and click it in there. And from our ability, which also holds our image, we can get the image icon. And we can click that one in there. So this is a little bit redundant, I just realized, because we have in our ability also our image. We don't need to send both of these. We're going to be removing this for the image one. Going back to the ability, we're going to be removing image here. Going back to ability container, now it's going to be red over here, so we're going to refresh. That's going to remove it. And that's going to be that. So basically what we're going to be doing in the widget for ability here is, let's create that first, because it's going to be very simple. It's not going to be a whole lot of things. So we're going to be creating, first we're going to removing the canvas panel, and then we're going to make it desired on screen. And in this case, we will also be making an overlay, adding it like so. And in the overlay, we want to have an image, like so. And then lastly, we want to have a text. That's not at all what I wanted to do. Like so. Text, there we go. We put that in the overlay as well. So the image we can rename to image icon, for example, and renaming it should make it bold in here and make sure that it gets variable, which it should get automatically. Same if we rename the text, we're gonna call it cooldown timer. This one, however, will most likely not be automatically made into a variable, so you have to click this box over here. To check what it's gonna look like, we're gonna put in a value here, we're gonna put in an 8. We're gonna zoom in a little bit here with our mouse scroll wheel. We're going to be centering it horizontally and vertically to make sure that it's in the center. And now, to make sure that this one looks good, we're going to be going into first color and opacity, and we're going to change it to something we can see, so something red, let's say. And in addition to that, we maybe want to change the font from 24 to 16. Something like that. It's pretty clear, it's pretty large, that's fine. We want it to be communicative about what it's doing, right? And this will be, so this is just how simple I will make it. So the white will represent an image and the number will represent our cooldown timer. And what we can do now is we remove this tick and pre-construct, and on the construct now here we can say that we want to get our image icon reference, and we want to set texture, set brush from texture, and the texture that we can use here is the image icon that we get in no. We can use the ability over here. From that we can get image icon, which we can use over here, because the ability here is being sent into us when spawned. The cooldown timer, we won't be setting right now. However, we will be making a function which we will call update visuals, like so. And this function we will be calling here. Okay, now this widget will be getting some more information sent to it at some point. It will be getting information about when cooldowns are happening. So we want to create an event here, a custom event, which we can call start cooldown. So when a cooldown happens for an ability, this widget will be made aware of it, and it will keep track of how much of the cooldown is left. So we'll make a variable for saying cooldown remaining, and we'll make this a float, like so. And this cooldown remaining will be set from the start cooldown. So we can just drag it in like so, so it gets its pin. And after that we want to set timer by event. And then we'll create an event from here by dragging out like so, opening up the add event, add custom event. We'll call this a cooldown update. So this event will trigger every time that this timer is activating. So let's create a different variable which we call cooldown time interval. And we can compile that one and set it to 0.5, so it will happen every half a second. So we'll drag this in here and use that as our time. So that means that every half a second, this timer will be called, and we'll call it looping, so it continuously keeps getting called. And for now we want to promote this to a variable also, just so we have it. So we'll call this timer handle. That'll be fine for now. So every half a second this event is going to be called. So this event is going to be keeping track of how much of our cooldown time is remaining. So we'll take our cooldown time remaining. We'll take a cooldown time interval because that's how much has passed since last we ran. So we can remove the remaining time or we can remove the cooldown time interval from the remaining time, and we'll get what time is now remaining, and we can then clamp this. And the only reason we're doing this is we want to make sure that it's 0 or above, basically. So the max we can set to something ridiculous, like a bunch of 9s or something, because that's not really interesting for us. After that, we set our cooldown remaining to the new value it has now achieved. And after that, we want to again update our visuals, because we want to update this widget with whatever changes has been made now, basically. So let's go check our update visuals then. So our update visuals is going to be updating what the widget looks like. So to begin with, we can take our cooldown remaining, because that one is going to be pretty key to determining how this will look like. So we'll put a branch here, and immediately we will compare the value of this cooldown remaining. So we'll have two cases, basically. Either we have more than 0 amount of time left, or we have reached 0 time left on the cooldown. So we'll plug this in. So reaching a false on this means that we have now 0 in time, which means that we don't want to keep calling our timer. So we'll say to our timer handle that we want to pause it. Like so. And after that, we want to update our visuals, basically, the texts and stuff like that. So we have our cooldown timer, which is our text for our cooldown. We'll not set it, we'll get the reference. And then we'll drag out from that and type in set text. And you want to have this bottom one here, set text. So if the cooldown is gone, so the ability is ready to be used again, we don't want to show a number here, so we're going to just be leaving this blank. That's what that's supposed to do. And when it comes to the image, we want to do something to display that it's also on cooldown in addition to the actual number. So we'll do a set brush tint color, and this allows us to do just that. And to make sure that we get the proper variable, what we can do is we can promote the variable here. And you get a tint color, and we can say that this is our ready tint color, for example. And then we can duplicate that. And we call this a cooldown tint color. So now we can specify what our colors are supposed to look like. So when it comes to our ready tint color, compile to get the values here, we can get a tint color here, it's immediately going to be pink. I would suggest that we get something that's super white, and it will become clear why in a moment. For now, we can, however, do the other path, and then I'll show you. So we're going to be needing another set text up here, we're going to be needing another set brush color up here. We're going to be needing to connect these variables up here like so. And instead of the tint color over here being ready tint color, we want the cooldown tint color. Like so. And we will be compiling that one, and we'll go to the cooldown tint color. And this one I would suggest, you can of course have something else, but if we press middle here, we get something white again. And you can just drag down this bar over here so it's a little bit gray. So that will be our cooldown tint color. Then we can take our cooldown remaining, and we want to, I'm thinking, since we have a number like 8 here, we want to keep track of the seconds. So what we can do is, since this is a float, we can say that we want to ceiling this value, which means we will get an integer from it. And then we can do that to, we can just drag it in here actually, like so, and it'll make it a text. And then we can move it a little bit. So we get our cooldown remaining, we round it up, we make it into a text so we can display it in there, and that's all that's done basically. So what happens when you have a image that's tinted white or gray is that if you have an image here and it's white, it's going to be looking exactly like whatever texture you have there. But if you put a color or tint on it, then that color will color that texture. So if you have something that is a white texture, let's say a white character on a black background, then you can tint it blue and the character will become blue, for example. So that works fine if you have images that are, or textures that are black and white. But let's say you have an image here that is already a color at all, other than white and black, something that is blue already. To display something like making it a tint with blue will not make much sense because it won't be visible. So using gradients instead, so white to black, will allow it to become dark blue or light blue, which will allow the player to more easily see if it is ready or not. And that is why we used those tint colors over here. Yeah, so we can compile the ability. I think we're done here, so we can go back to our ability container. And our ability container, we still have some things we need to do. We had just created our widget here, which is all good and fine, but we also need an owning player. So we will just type in owning player. And that will go from this widget, will sense whoever is owning this widget, and we'll just make sure to also assign that owner to this widget as well, which makes sense. In addition to that, we also want to keep track of the widgets that we actually create here. So let's create an array here of ability widget references. And we'll make that of W ability object reference. Like so. However, what we could do is, let's do this. Let's go BP ability instead. And let's make it a map just like before. So now the ability will be the actual key, and we'll use a W ability as the actual payload for a specific ability. Now we can drag this out here. And now let's say we want to add to this one. So this is what we get. So we get the array or the map dictionary that it wants to add to. It wants to have a key, and the key is going to be our ability, right? So we're going to be taking our ability from over here, like so. And then the actual payload or the value inside of it is going to be a widget of type ability, which is what we have just created here. So we drag it in like so. Now we have created that. Now what we want to do is we want to add it to our uniform grid panel. Now a uniform grid panel works in the ways that any child that you put in here will get a row and a column value, and then it will evenly distribute those. So we will just be making some in my case here, I'm just thinking we should have 3 abilities. So I'm just going to be putting in some values here to make some mathematical magic just to have it displayed in a certain way. It's nothing super fancy, and you can totally do this in a different way if you want to. But if you want to have the same as me, then this is how we'll do it. We will take a reference to the uniform grid panel, and we will add a child to uniform grid panel, like so. And then you can see that it will actually ask you for a row and a column. In addition to that, it will also want some content. And the content it wants to begin with is the widget that we just created. So we'll just drag that one in there so we have it done. Then when it comes to the other stuff, what we're going to be doing is we're going to be using our looping that we have done earlier. And we're going to be saying that our array index is going to be determining our column. So it will be going from left to right. So our first index, our 0, will be the furthest to the left, and then in our middle we will have the 1, and then to the right we will have our 2. So that's how that will be figured out. When it comes to our rows, I want them to be in sort of like a bottom left, top middle, and then bottom right position, so that they look like sort of like a triangle. To do that, we can do the following. We can drag from our array index over here, and we can add a value. We can add a 1. And then we can do a modulus on that, dividing it by 2. type mod and you get this little thingy, and you can type in 2 here, which means that it will divide something by 2 or every value by 2, and it will just give you the remainder of it, and that will just plug in into the row here, which will give me the specific look that I'm after. And that's all good and fine for the loop body, but now we are done with the loop. What do we need to do? Well, we need to do some communicating now. We can get owning player pawn. That's owning player pawn, that would be cool. Owning player pawn like so. And then we'll cast this to our third person character. So. And this now gives us our third person character, which we can then use to bind event dispatchers to. So we'll bind ability, cooldown, start. So when a cooldown starts, then this widget will be informed about it. And we'll make a custom event, call this cool, let's call it ability, cooldown start, like so. So then we'll get in our ability here, which we used as our key earlier. So that's nice. That means that we can get our ability widget ref over here, and we can say find. We can send in our ability, which means that we will get which widget this is, because remember, we're in the ability container now, we're not in an actual ability, but now we get our widget, which this is actually interesting for. And then we can tell that widget to start the cooldown that we created a function for earlier. So then it will start its timer and keep track of how long it should be going on for. And the cooldown remaining that it needs is going to be this ability. That's not an ability. This is an ability. So we get the cooldown from here. Let's type in get cooldown like so, and we'll plug it in there. So if we have 10 seconds here, it's going to say you need to count down from 10 basically. And yeah, that should do it, I think, for the ability. Let's go back to our HUD now, because we have a little bit more we need to do in our HUD. Because we made these UI abilities, and now we need to call on the ability container and use this init function that we just created, the init abilities, and just send these values through here, like so. And that should be all of the HUD pieces done for now. Nothing is of course communicating with them yet, but we'll get to that. Actually, we can probably do that already, I think. I think I'll keep it for a bit later. So we'll stop there for now. That is all for this episode. Hope to see you in the next one. Keep on learning. Take care.